Classical conditioning is a fundamental principle in psychology that explores how associations between stimuli can shape behavior. It involves the process of acquisition, where a neutral stimulus becomes associated with a meaningful stimulus to elicit a response. However, when the association between the stimuli is no longer reinforced, a phenomenon known as extinction occurs, resulting in the weakening or disappearance of the learned response. Yet even after a period of extinction, there is the potential for a spontaneous recovery where the learned response re-emerges in the presence of the conditioned stimulus. This interplay between acquisition, extinction, and spontaneous recovery offers valuable insights into the dynamics of learning and behavior. Through captivating stories and real-life examples, we can explore the intriguing world of classical conditioning and delve into the intricacies of how these principles shape our experience and interactions with the world around us. I am Blessing Varghese, a junior research fellow at Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala, and welcome to my channel, Mindscape. Number 1. The principle of acquisition. The principle of acquisition is a fundamental concept in classical conditioning that explores how organisms learn to associate stimuli and develop conditioned responses. During the process of acquisition, a neutral stimulus, which initially does not elicit any significant response, becomes paired with an unconditioned stimulus that naturally triggers a reflexive or innate response. Through repeated pairings, the neutral stimulus gradually acquires the ability to evoke the same response as the unconditioned stimulus. The acquisition process involves the establishment of a connection between the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, leading to the formation of a conditioned stimulus. This means that the neutral stimulus now elicits a conditioned response similar to the response originally evoked by the unconditioned stimulus. For example, in the classical experiment of Pavlov's dog, the sound of a bell was initially a neutral stimulus. However, when the bell was repeatedly presented just before the dogs received food, they began to associate the bell with food. Eventually, the bell alone was enough to elicit salivation in the dogs even in the absence of food. The principles of timing and contiguity play a crucial role in acquisition. For the association to form effectively, the neutral stimulus needs to be presented in close proximity to the unconditioned stimulus, ideally just before or simultaneously. This temporal contiguity strengthens the association between the two stimuli, facilitating the acquisition process. The principle of acquisition demonstrates the remarkable capacity of organisms to learn and adapt through the formation of associations between stimuli. It highlights the role of conditioning in shaping behavior as well as the potential for new responses to emerge from previously neutral stimuli. By understanding the principle of acquisition, researchers, educators, and individuals can employ conditioning techniques to facilitate learning, modify behavior, and enhance the understanding of the complex process that underlie our everyday experiences. Meet Mrs. Julia, a high school teacher who wants to establish a positive classroom atmosphere by reinforcing respectful behavior among her students. She decided to use verbal praises as a conditioned stimulus and a small reward as an unconditioned stimulus to encourage students to demonstrate respectful behavior. As the beginning of the school year, Mrs. Julia implements a system where she verbally praises students who display respectful behavior, such as listening attentively, raising their hand to speak, and treating others with kindness. Each time she praises a student, she also gives a small reward such as a sticker or a token. As the school year progresses, the students begin to associate the verbal praise with a rewarding experience. They understand that by exhibiting respectful behavior, they are more likely to receive praise and a small reward. Consequently, the conditioned response of respectful behavior becomes more prevalent among the students. Over time, Mrs. Julia finds that the students actively engage in respectful behaviors without the need for constant reinforcement. The association between the verbal praise and the rewarding experience has been established, and the students continue to display respectful behavior even when the rewards are not always present. This story highlights how the principle of acquisition can be utilized in the classroom to foster desirable behaviors and create a positive learning environment. By providing consistent reinforcement and positive feedback, teachers can shape and reinforce behaviors that contribute to a respectful and engaging classroom atmosphere. Number 2. The principle of extinction. The principle of extinction is a vital concept in classical conditioning that explores the process of weakening or eliminating a previously conditioned response. Extinction occurs when the conditioned response is presented repeatedly without the unconditioned stimulus, leading to a decrease in the conditioned response over time. During the acquisition phase, a neutral stimulus becomes associated with an unconditioned stimulus, eliciting a specific response. However, when the association between the CS and UCS is no longer reinforced, the conditioned response gradually diminishes or disappears altogether. This process of unlearning is known as extinction. Extinction involves exposing the organism to the conditioned stimulus without the presence of the unconditioned stimulus. For example, in Pavlov's dog experiment, if the bell is repeatedly presented without the subsequent presentation of food, the dogs eventually stop salivating to the sound of the bell alone. The principle of extinction demonstrates the dynamic nature of learned responses. It reveals that conditioned responses are not permanent and can be weakened or eliminated through the absence of reinforcement. However, it is important to note that extinction does not erase the initial conditioning entirely. The association between the CS and the UCS may still exist but is temporarily suppressed. Meet Lisa, a dedicated fitness enthusiast who decided to start a new exercise routine. Every evening she would go for a jog in a nearby park accompanied by her trusty dog Max. Over time, Max associated the jingling sound of Lisa's key with her daily jogging season. As soon as Max heard the jingling key, he would become excited, wagging his tail and eagerly waiting by the door. One day, Lisa sustained a minor injury and had to take a break from jogging. She rested for a few weeks, during which the jingling keys were absent from her routine. When Lisa eventually recovered and decided to resume jogging, she grabbed her key as usual. To her surprise, Max did not display the same excitement as before. He no longer associated the sound of the key with her jogging sessions. What happened here is an example of extinction. Due to the absence of jogging sessions during Lisa's recovery period, the association between the jingling keys and the enjoyable activity gradually weakened and eventually extinguished. Max's conditioned response, which was initially triggered by the sound of the keys, diminished over time because the association was no longer reinforced. While Max's initial response was a conditioned response resulting from the association between the keys and jogging, the lack of reinforcement during Lisa's break led to the extinction of that response. Max had unlearned the association between the key and the pleasurable activity. Number 3. The principle of spontaneous recovery. Spontaneous recovery refers to the reappearance of a previously extinguished conditioned response after a period of rest or in the absence of further conditioning trials. When an extinguished conditioned stimulus is presented again following a break, a weak and temporary return of the conditioned response may occur. This occurs even though no additional pairings of the CS and UCS have taken place. For example, let's say a dog was conditioned to associate the sound of a bell with receiving food, resulting in salivation. If the bell is repeatedly presented without food, the dog will eventually stop salivating to the sound of the bell. However, if the bell is reintroduced after a period of rest, the dog may exhibit a slight but temporary increase in salivation before the response gradually diminishes again. Spontaneous recovery is considered to be a form of the temporary revival of a previously occurred association, even though the association was weakened or suppressed during the extinction process. It can be seen as an indication that the original conditioning is not entirely erased and that the association between the CS and CR is still present in the organism's memory. Number 4. The principle of generalization. The principle of generalization in Pavlovian conditioning suggests that once the conditioned response has been established to a particular stimulus, similar stimuli that share certain characteristics with the original stimulus can also elicit a similar response. For example, if Pavlov were to use a different bell that had a slightly higher pitch, the dogs might still salivate in response to that bell, demonstrating the generalization of the conditioned response. The degree of generalization would likely decrease as the stimuli becomes less similar to the original conditioned stimulus. The principle of generalization in Pavlovian conditioning highlights the fact that conditioned responses are not restricted to specific stimuli but can be triggered by similar stimuli. This principle helps explain how associations formed through classical conditioning can extend beyond the exact training stimuli, allowing organisms to respond adaptively to new but similar situations. Number 5. The principle of discrimination. The principle of discrimination refers to the ability to differentiate and respond selectively to specific stimuli while inhibiting responses to similar but irrelevant stimuli. It is the opposite of the principle of generalization. In classical conditioning, discrimination occurs when an organism learns to respond selectively to a specific CS while inhibiting the conditioned response to other similar stimuli that are not paired to the UCS. This ability to discriminate between different stimuli is crucial for adaptive behavior as it allows the organism to respond appropriately only in situations where the relevant stimulus is present. Suppose you have a job as a receptionist at a busy office. Your role involves answering phone calls and directing them to the appropriate departments. To make your job more efficient, you use different ringtones on your desk phone to discriminate between internal calls and external calls. For internal calls, you have set a specific ringtone, while for external calls, you have a different ringtone. Over time, you have associated the internal ringtone with calls that originate within the office, indicating that you only need to transfer the call to the appropriate department or person within the company. On the other hand, the external ringtone signals calls coming from outside the office, which may require different handling. You have learned to discern these calls and understand that you need to answer them professionally, gather relevant information, and potentially direct them to the appropriate person or take a message. Through discrimination, you have become adept at differentiating between the internal and external calls based on the specific ringtones. This discrimination allows you to respond differently to each type of call, efficiently managing and directing calls within the office and handling external calls with the appropriate protocols. Number 6. The principle of higher order conditioning. Higher order conditioning, also known as second order conditioning, is a type of classical conditioning where a new conditioned stimulus, CS2, is paired with a previously established conditioned stimulus, CS1. instead of being directly paired with an unconditioned stimulus. Through this process, the CS2 can acquire the ability to elicit a conditioned response even without direct pairing with the UCS. In higher order conditioning, the CS1 has already been associated with the UCS through prior conditioning. This means that CS1 already elicits a CR. In the next phase, the CR is presented after the CS1, creating an association between the two stimuli. Eventually, through repeated pairings, the CS2 alone can elicit a CR similar to the response produced by the CS1. For example, let's say a bell has been previously paired with food, leading to the bell alone eliciting salivation. In higher order conditioning, a light is presented immediately after the bell. After several pairings of the bell and the light alone can come to elicit a conditioned response even without the presence of the food. Higher order conditioning demonstrates the ability of a conditioned stimulus to serve as an unconditioned stimulus for another stimulus, allowing for the formation of new associations and the expansion of conditioned responses to additional stimuli. It highlights the hierarchical nature of conditioned responses and the potential for complex learning processes to occur through successive conditioning stages. In conclusion, classical conditioning is a fundamental form of learning where associations are formed between stimuli. During acquisition, a neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus that elicits a conditioned response similar to the unconditioned response produced by an unconditioned stimulus. Extinction occurs when the conditioned response diminishes after the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented without the unconditioned stimulus. Spontaneous recovery refers to the reappearance of the conditioned response after a rest period. Generalization happens when similar stimuli to the conditioned stimulus elicits a similar response, while discrimination is the ability to differentiate between the conditioned stimulus and similar but irrelevant stimuli. Higher order conditioning involves a new stimulus acquiring conditioned response properties through association with an already established conditioned stimulus. These principles provide insights into how organisms learn to associate stimuli and shape their behavioral responses based on these learned associations. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video on the principles of classical conditioning. I sincerely hope that it provided you with valuable insights and a deeper understanding of this fundamental concept. If you have any questions or thoughts, please don't hesitate to share them in the comment section below.